All right, folks. Uh, my name is Aaron Rosenthal. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at Syncari, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this RevGenius session on how to navigate M&A and multi-CRM complexity. I'm joined today by Melissa McCready, who is the founder and CEO of Navigate Consulting Group. And also joining us is Scott Marsalis, Senior Marketing Operations Manager at Conga. So I'm going to start with having each of you introduce yourselves, and then we're going to and what you do, and then we're going to dive into this topic. So take it away, Melissa. We'll start with you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today. And Aaron, thank you for having me, and RevGenius to you as well. I've been doing revenue operations, marketing operations, customer success operations, sales operations for longer than it's been called RevOps back in 1999. So really long time. And I currently am doing a lot of fractional leadership at companies, helping them with what I like to coin as growth operations, which is revenue operations times 10. It's looking at a bigger picture of how we're doing operations strategically. So thanks for having me.
Cool. And then also, again, yes, thank you to everybody having me here. My name is Scott Marsalis, Senior Marketing Operations Manager here at Conga. What I do and my responsibilities is managing a team of 7 with anything from email marketing all the way through sales operations, actually as of today, a little bit. So very, very cool stuff. My main focus around what we try to do here at Conga is everything technology related, all the way from how do we put AI in places where it should be and remove it where it shouldn't, and making our data clean. That is my responsibility.
Cool. So I think it's great having you both here because Scott, you work within an org, and Melissa, you advise companies. So I know that Scott, we're going to start with you because I'm sure you've been very hands-on with this topic. So why don't you start with just explaining, set the scene around your whole multi-CRM setup, like how it started, how you got there, the environment that you're in right now, or before when you were dealing with this merge or migrate or sync.
Sure. I can start probably about 2 years ago. Originally, we were an organization called Aptus Corporation. So it was more RevOps related technology solutions. Our biggest partner, it still is today, Salesforce, where we use nothing but Salesforce. But we had a little bit of a challenge, right? So we had 2 extremely large CRM instances with 2 completely different ways on how to generate revenue. So how we tried to do that today is we said, okay, well, what is the current company objectives? Working with our CEO all the way down to our chief product officer and our COO, and said, okay, what is the current goals and objectives of the business? What are we trying to achieve? How do we want to position this? And most importantly, how do we migrate this data, or in fact, do we merge this data without diluting the effect that our brand had on our customers? So how did we do that? So what we had to do was galvanize a list of stakeholders by all the way from customer success, finance, etc., across the board, and really get everybody in one room and say, okay, is this aligned to our business objectives? And then we really need to set some goals and set them quick. So at a very high level, that's how we galvanized the foundation of what we were trying to do. And then after that, it was really saying, okay, what kind of data do we want to keep? What kind of data do we want to merge, normalize? And then ultimately, what kind of data do we want to augment? How do we do that? And then how do we do it in a timely fashion, right? It's like those 3 types of rules is like, 1, set objectives, just like any other business, goal or process or project. How do we clean their data? And then how do we execute it and set expectations specifically with our customers, right? Since, we're using our Salesforce instance really as very, very customer first, and it's really based off of that. How do we make sure that this does not dilute the fact? How do we make sure that it doesn't affect our brand on communications out to sales? those were the things that were the most important to us. So we did have obviously senior executive support for that. And we galvanized everybody together. So hopefully I answer your question. That was really the foundation of how we got started, Aaron.
There's a lot of details I think we're going to double click on. And you got to this situation because of a merger or acquisition.
That's correct.
That is not the only reason why companies find themselves in a multi-CRM setup. Melissa, maybe you can explain, maybe give an example or talk about a scenario where you've encountered, multiple CRMs. Sometimes it can be 2, but sometimes it can be a dozen.
Absolutely. I mean, between CRMs and marketing automation platforms, I've walked into environments as a consultant where there have been 20 plus. And when you see that, you cringe. But usually the larger enterprise companies, you're going to see that. And a lot of times is you have different lines of businesses. Maybe you have language issues that are a good reason for you to have a separate CRM. So I think that from what I've seen, it really comes down to what is the CRM being used for? What's the business requirement? And then if it makes sense, and in some cases it does, it can really pull out complexities and setup and administration and just managing data and the flows and moving data out other places that's needed. So yeah, I've seen lots of different things. M&A tends to be one of them, but I do think in the large enterprise environments, you definitely see multiple instances a lot more.
Yeah, I like the example of, I didn't even think of it myself. Although at Syncari, we see this is one of the key things that we help companies with is what do you do with multiple systems, CRM systems specifically. But there's definitely a lot of challenges there. I want to talk to, I'll ask Scott around, because you did touch on, there's alignment that has to occur in this situation, right? Especially when you're talking about not only you're merging 2 separate CRMs, but you're also often merging 2 teams. You're deciding who's responsible for what. Scott, at Conga, what did that look like? Who started looking at this comprehensive view of what data is between these systems, and then what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, our CIO was really instrumental in doing that. One of our core values at Conga that we have internally, our core objectives, is solidify the core. What that means is to make sure our data is normalized so we can actually go out to our customers, speak to them about their products and services, and then ultimately, our prospects as well. We want to make sure that they have a really great buying experience when they're looking for one of our products. So how do we solidify the core? And it's all of the conversation was around that. So once we realized that, how do we do it, and which one's best, and which path is the best, then it became really easy, because then we were saying, okay, well, then if that is in fact what we're trying to do along A, then B is definitely not the answer because it doesn't meet the requirements that we have today. So after that, it felt really kind of simple. As far as data and getting into the weeds and saying, okay, what do we keep as far as what we want to, throw away, or what, et cetera, et cetera. That was a little bit more difficult. And the reason why it was so difficult is there was really no way to have a unification without a unified data platform, right? There was really no way to actually put it in one spot and say, okay, now I have it as a proxy, but then where does it go? And then how do I get it there without something like, deliberately going into iPath, and then you have all these different types of technology you can do that, right? We tried to not do that in form of speed. And then what we did realize is that without it, we couldn't do it at speed. So that's really where we ended up there.
Half the time when we see these situations, you can spend half a year just getting the data into a data warehouse before you can even figure out how you're going to sync with other systems or multiple CRMs.
Yeah, what table is that in? Type of conversation.
Right.
Scott, when you were going, when you were starting this, how did you decide, whether you are, because you're did you replace the system entirely, or are you living in a world where you still have multiple CRMs?
No, actually, we're in one CRM now, collectively. Um, and so what we did was, is after we identified all those in process, our main very first objective, like, because we were like, okay, customer first, very, very, very much so. How do we get all of the digital hand raisers into the hands of BDRs quickly? That way, it doesn't stifle revenue generation, right?
Yep.
That was our main goal. And how did we do that? We had two different systems. We had to figure out a multi-dimensional lead routing type of process, qualification process, whether that was through, how do we identify MQLs or SAOs in this system versus the other one? Well, they were entirely different. We had to have like a proxy in between, almost recreate the wheel quickly, but then start to merge it over time. And that's actually what we did. There was a time delta in between to actually allow everything to normalize. And I think that took about 30 days really to make sure that everything was, all of our people and processes were operating out of one Salesforce instance, as opposed to saying, what the other one was. And eventually over time, the inclusion of a named platform, which what we had, which was the old one, or not, I want to say the old one, but the deprecated one, if you will, was not even inside of any of our language at that point. And I felt we did that really, really quickly in 30 days.
Yeah,
That's
that is
fast.
very quick. Melissa, how would you go about, when you're advising your clients, there can be reasons why you want to maintain multiple CRMs, but beyond, let's say one tool is in one language and another is another. What would you recommend in deciding, do I keep them both running versus do I transition to another another CRM? And of course, if you're keeping them both, in our world, sync is very essential because you've got two separate systems. You want to make sure that they're both in cohort with one another. So, yeah, how would you help a company decide? Obviously, cost. There's a cost factor. So ignoring that, because there's many other reasons besides cost as to whether you might want to ditch a CRM or keep one.
So I think sync versus migrate has some factors to it. You have product, you have people, you have current systems and integrations, you have current data models and reporting across systems, you have available resources, timelines, and budget, and that cost thing there, right? But those are all factors that you need to consider if you're going to sync versus you're going to migrate. A rule of thumb is you migrate when the data models are similar enough and access to that data needs to be shared and people processes need to be assimilated. That is when you migrate. Sync is when people processes are different, business lines are different, but the data needs to be shared and leveraged for growth. So one is I need to have unified data and unified processes. The other is I need to have unified data, but the process and the way I'm going about the business may be different. And so really looking at those in a deep way, right? And looking at what the data models are and saying, in the big picture of things, what is going to make more sense? But I really do think that those two rules of thumbs about migrate versus sync has to do with that assimilation on the process.
Yeah, what would you say, like Melissa, in your experience, how long have you seen companies like maintain multiple systems when their eventual goal is to, migrate entirely to one? Like, what are the gates for deciding that okay, we've gotten things working between the two now, because that's kind of essential. You got to make sure that they can operate within the same, in the same world at the same time. But then when do you decide, okay, it's time, like we could do everything we need with the new system. What do you want to be looking at to make sure that, okay, we are ready to make that transition?
Yeah, that readiness is really important. I think you need to look at the data set and what the volume looks like for that. And are you going to need to move over the data set? If you've already done that between the systems and already have two systems running with similar data, you've now removed that gate. The next piece is the disruption to the business. So what happens and assessing what happens with the integration. Are you turning off integrations and turning them back on, for example, between a CRM and a map or a dialing tool or your customer relationship management platform, and having to turn those on and turn those off. What is the disruption to the business, and weighting that? And has that all been vetted and tested? That's so important, that if you haven't vetted and tested those integrations, and you go to do that, there's a risk involved. So I think it's really, the risk involved is going to be the data. It's going to be the downtime in the integrations. And the fact is, like, if you're doing this right and you've got that assimilation going on with the process, you should be fine on the process side. It's really data and integration that get tricky.
Yeah, Scott, what were there specific things that you were looking for around success criteria when you were ready to make that full switch?
Yeah, I mean, I think Melissa hit the nail on the head when she said one of the biggest risks is data, and it's also, enablement. Like, people and processes. Like, okay, you have new data, and if you're not telling people how to use it, especially in a sales process or in a CS org, that's what happens, right? Nothing.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
like, part of that is saying, okay, if we're making a decision to either sync or migrate that information, I already have to have, in my back pocket, a couple different plans on how to, like, navigate the enablement process around both of these things, and how to set expectations around how this data is going to turn into revenue, and what leaders should do with it, and what to look for, especially when opening opportunities in the revenue lifecycle. So yeah, I totally agree with Melissa. That was one of our biggest challenges, was making sure that we had data enablement at the forefront and part of that process and part of that strategy.
And on the people enablement, let me just add too that this comes at the front ends of planning for these things. And what I see happen is that enablement tends to get put as an afterthought, and it doesn't, people start thinking about it, in a short runway of 30 days is incredible to do that quickly. But let's just say you're talking about enablement. To build enablement and training takes a long time. It is not an easy thing to do. You're talking about training people. People is the hardest part of any project you do. Change management is always number one on the list, is going to make it difficult. So take into consideration the systems and the data. Scott, if you do not have those people aligned, as we know, and you don't have that enablement, you're dead in the water. And now you've put even a bigger risk on the business. So I think doing that up front. And another thing too, is that when we talk about what you can do to avoid those things, it is the planning in the beginning. It's creating committees of people who can help with user and user testing. Maybe even doing a small launch to a beta group where they're running it for 2 weeks before the rest of the team it rolls out to. And maybe you're doing a roll to different teams at different times, so that you can now stagger that training and stagger that risk. So those are some ways that I've seen work really well too, especially in larger environments, to handle that enablement piece really well.
Yeah, I'm sure we could have a whole other session on just change management, right? And when you're changing something as fundamental and widely used as CRM, that change is going to affect a lot of people. And we, in our world at Syncari, we see a bit of both sides. And when I say bit of both sides, when we start working with companies and going down the road of unification, you've got half that already have their data models defined, and it's well known, well established, and so that makes the project a lot cleaner. But then often, we start asking questions, as I'm sure you folks going through this multi-CRM migration project, where you're asking questions a lot of people have never even answered before. I'd love to hear an example of where, because these projects tend to get a lot of stakeholders who come out of the weeds and are involved in these things for the very first time. I'd love to hear from either of you, what are some of the benefits of, because when you're thinking about bringing more people into a project, always there's that hesitation, because that, this is someone who's going to have, a whole bunch of new requirements for me, and it's going to be a lot more work. Or here's someone who's going to object to our initial plan. But you kind of have to rip that Band-Aid off, right? Because the last thing you want is for that person who does have a stake in the ground to, partway through the migration say, oh, well, we need this, we need this data in this way. But that alignment during a project like this, I'd love to hear if either of you have examples of, how you were able to get folks who are pretty new to this process who may have been brought in, and how you were able to, even after the fact, what you may have benefited from now that you've got this group of people who actually understand like data models when maybe they didn't previously, or how your entities are related versus didn't before a project like this.
I'll go ahead. I was going to say that I think what's really important is that when you're even just thinking about doing something, and it's really, this is the cart before the horse sort of scenario, but you need to do an education process and talk to your peers and your stakeholders and get an assessment if people are really ready. And if they're not, what ready means is that people have enough information that they can move forward with something, right? And I think that's where I see a lot of companies go in and they haven't done that work yet. And so a lot of times that I'll go in, there's an education process. We have to really lay out, what does it mean to each of those stakeholders? What's the business impact? And how do you do that? So, it starts with kind of these committees coming in and talking about, like, get a group of people together, put a project charter together, talk about what roles and responsibilities would look like. What does this look to each of them? There's a lot of socialization that needs to happen, especially on this scale of a project with this big of impact. And I think what I see happen all too often is that you'll get somebody go and they'll step on the gas and they'll forget that somebody over here is impacted that they didn't know about or they forgot about. And that happens, and it isn't personal, right? It just, in this big scale of things, it can happen. So I think that the other piece of it is getting in front of executive leadership and having them help you promote that project and help with the education process. So if you have town hall meetings, if you have, a monthly meeting and it's not called a town hall, something like that, to talk about what this project is going to be as early on as you can is the best advice I can give anybody. Because the earlier that you do that, the more chance you have of getting more people in on it. And the questions that are going to come up aren't going to be the why. They're going to be the what do I need to do to support this when you're involving people early on. So I think having those regular meetings, setting meeting cadences around the project as early as possible, and really, formulating your team. And it is on you as a project leader to do that. You can't expect that anybody is going to do that for you. It really is, if it's your project, your initiative, and you're on the line for that, you need to take charge and do all of that. No one's going to do it for you. Trust me.
Yeah, that's the truth. Totally, 100%. I agree with you, Melissa. I use something similar, like in very basic terms, like sell or tell. It's almost, and with tactical empathy, right? It's like when I'm trying to, like, going back to the five dysfunctions. When I'm galvanizing these people together, what I like to do is say, okay, hey, I understand that this is a new process. Here's how it's going to look, and here's my vision for the process. But I also understand that you have all this other thing. But guess what? By doing this and helping me out, here's what comes off.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't seem as hard. And then you can actually galvanize more people to actually take action. That's exactly how we did it here at Conga, that quickly. And you're totally right. And especially executive sponsorship. It all starts with executive sponsorship because, senior manager, CEO, they're going to listen to that guy way more.
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to add to that too is that when you go in to talk to people about, and educating them on what you're doing, you need to put it in terms that they can understand. For example, I'm working in revenue operations, right? I'm going out to marketing and I'm saying, I am going to increase the quality of MQLs to help you increase conversion to pipeline by 5% next quarter. It needs to be in those specific terms to say, this is what our goal is to help your group, and we want your buy-in to do this. It's going to be very unlikely they're going to tell you no when you put it in those terms. And so it's almost like you automatically are like, why wouldn't you do this, right? And so you need to think about the way that you phrase that to the stakeholders is to put it in such terms that it really it's a no-brainer. They need to do it. They need to be on board with you. If you have those opportunities, take those opportunities and do that.
How much, you know, outcomes, of course, for business leaders, like that's what they want to see.
Yes.
But obviously, these projects involve both the sign up from leaders as well as involvement by the doers, right? And doers are sure maybe they have some KPIs where outcomes might matter a little, but they're more interested in like how easy, how fast, versus how complex is the work to be done. Do you involve those two different types of people, like all the way from the beginning? Or do you kind of have this structure where you start? Of course, you have to get sign off, but how much do you continue involvement by leadership versus the doers as you start this planning phase?
I would say
With,
this. Yeah, I would say this. I would say that the majority of reason that you're going to be doing the project is because of the practitioners and the people that are feeling the pain are going to be the ones who are going to be doing the work. And so they're probably hearing a lot already, and you're already bubbling up that conversation. I think that those are very two different audiences. That's a great call out, and that's really important. I think coming together to work on a project charter, which goes through those business objectives, it's going to go through what the goals are, the baselines, who the people need to be involved, what does that time look like for them and the impact on their teams or them individually, and then how long is it going to take, right? And looking at a roadmap and looking at that collectively and high level. So, and what I mean by high level is you're looking across not just this project and getting it done, but what else do they have going on that this may interrupt, or vice versa, that what they're doing may interrupt what you're doing. And I think that the earlier you have those conversations, the better. But I do think that a lot of the projects, the noise starts from the people who are in it and who are working on it and keep hearing the complaints. It's very rare. I mean, yes, you may have a CEO come and says, and they'll say, we need to hit $45 million in revenue in the next 2 quarters. And you're going, okay, great. That's everybody's problem, right? But from a practitioner perspective, I can't do a list import and enrich that data and hand it over to the BDR team. And as a result, leads are getting over there 2 weeks after an event. You're going to be hearing a lot about that from a lot of the people who are expecting that data. And usually the top isn't going to know about it until all of those rumblings have made their way up. So I do think it does start from the people who are in it every day, listen to them, and hear what, like, really listen to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to kind of shift gears slightly, but also talking about priorities. When you're starting a project like this and you're looking to obviously figure out what is that end goal, that end state, what is it going to look like? Maybe I'll start with Scott, but I want to ask, there's 2 ways that you can go about a project like this, just broadly. It's like, we migrate and we continue business as usual. Like we're supporting all the same processes and automations, and we're essentially, it's a lot of work, but we're still getting to this state where everything that has existed is a maintained process, maintained automation, maintained way that the data is existing. But the other, I think, sometimes tempting aspect is, what are the new things we should be doing? And is this initial, like the impetus of a project like this, where you're migrating multiple CRMs, is that the right time to try to do something new? Or do you wait to get to that success criteria, you finish this initial project, and then you do something new? Like, how much should you insert new objectives versus what you're currently doing today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, how we took the approach is we said, during the planning phase, and this goes back to like Melissa's point, is like during that phase, we had like a very high level, like, okay, what is this going to, as far as the wonders in the room, what can we do with this? Like, how do we really like take this type of new information and build a better environment for our internal customers, which is our salespeople, but also our external ones? And we said, okay, well, while we have the smart people in the room, the people that are actually going to help us do this, this migration or the sync project, what kind of extra things can we add here that are going to allow that data to actually really take flight? So, I mean, it was perfect for us. And again, I'm talking about like 2 CRM instances globally to where it was like, okay, that's low risk. You're talking about 20, it's probably a much different discussion. And Melissa's laughing, but for us, it was like, okay, that's relatively simple. Like we can identify different enrichment processes that we've been wanting to do on just the Marketo side for a long time that was in real time, and we're able to do that with a sync process. So for us, it really worked. And it's almost like how much data can you consider? And then really who's executing it? What's the team look like? Do we actually have the people and the resources to actually do that? Do we have the budget? Again, it goes back to Melissa's point of all those different things inside that planning process can be determined. You can definitely do that. And we did it. But again, 2 CRMs, not 20. 10 more, or that'd be insane.
Can I add on to that too?
Yes, please.
I think when you talk about new things, the weight of how many foundational fixes will it take to do it is very important. And what is the
Yeah.
goal of the project? What I see a lot is that people will come in and go, hey, really want to do this neat thing. And I'm like, that's great, but your sales process is broken. So there's an order of operations. And I always say that you have to consider order of operations and what the goal is to determine how much other new things you're going to be able to fit in. And here's what happens. As we know, you're going to do this project. Maybe it takes 6 months. Maybe it takes 3 months. Maybe it takes 12 months. Guess what's going to happen during that time? Technology is going to change. Something new is going to come online and someone's going to see the bright, shiny object. And so being able to decipher between bright and shiny objects and things that are necessary that will help you get to that line of success that you've set and those order of operations that have to be there. I can't tell you how many times I have somebody say, we want to do ABM. I'm like, your systems are absolutely not ready for it. Your data is not ready for that. You've got a good 6 months to get those things down, measure them, and then come back and say, yes, that's what we want to do. In the meantime, there are things that you can stand up in parallel while you're working on that, but you're not going to go and launch a full scale ABM systems process technology with all the measurements, in a project where your sales process is being fixed. So that happens quite more than it doesn't, which is kind of scary. But I think as we get over time and more things evolve with revenue operations and just process in general and how that works across the business and alignment, that we're going to see that become less and less. I'm very hopeful for that.
Yeah. I obviously kind of me drinking the Syncari Kool-Aid, but Syncari or not, and I am going to talk a little bit about the modern data stack and the role in that, because that is an alternative way to do it, much more time consuming. But we always, we're constantly saying that no matter how you want to activate insights or, activate data for automation purposes or, whatever, it all starts with unification. Because if you're still operating within that vertical like team silo, you're only seeing a small piece of the pie. Maybe it's a bigger piece, but it's definitely not the whole pie. So all things have to be unified. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Melissa. Like before you can do these great things and achieve these great outcomes, like that level 1 data maturity is all your data unified and consistent across all systems. And a CRM project like this is a great starting point for that, because you take 2 CRMs or 20 CRMs and they still have to be unified at some point. But the byproduct of that is now once they're unified, any other system that is connected is then inherently unified and accessible and activatable across any other connected system.
It is the powerful thing that everybody needs and everybody wants. And want to hear something funny about this is the B2C space has been doing this a long time, utilizing customer master, right? And so here we are with B2B and we're trying to do it. And I think what we're finding is that because the sales cycles are longer, it takes longer. because you need to have that data to figure out what is meaningful. And if you introduce new products in the midst of that, you introduce new services in the mix of that, all of that changes yet again, right? But I do think that unification is everything. I think if a modern data stack, if it doesn't have some sort of unification tool, it's going to stale out within the next 12 months. Very, very, I mean, without a doubt, you need to have unified data. This is the thing that is going to give you the competitive advantage, but also too, with things coming online with AI and Chat GPT, things are going to start moving even faster than they were, which is insane. And if you don't have your data structured where it's unified, it's going to be very difficult to keep up.
Great point. I mean, yeah, I think the only consistency when in the world of technology is change, right?
Yes.
Things are always evolving and changing.
Yeah.
Scott, did you guys at Conga go through a debate internally? Like, do we accomplish this unification via MDS versus, let's look for a tool that can do all of it? Was that even a consideration? When I say MDS, for anyone who doesn't know the acronym, modern data stack, as in, your data sources, some ETL, ELT tool, data warehouse, clean, cleanse, reverse ETL out. Like, there's a lot of pieces in that. And I know some people try to tackle this in that way if you have a data team. I don't know if you do, Scott.
Yeah, we do. And, part of the process is that, when you work with multiple CRMs, part of the team and the main team, especially on our side in Aptus and with Conga, the quote unquote owners of our CRM was IT. So they naturally gravitate to iPaaS systems and naturally gravitate towards those types of things. But using something like a unified data platform, unified customer platform is really where it resonated for us. Just because IT is, they are the key holders, and they make sure the system doesn't go down, and they pay the bill, right? As far as business operations, like, that's us. So we needed a tool that actually gave us the flexibility and the power to move these things around at speed, right? And to get the right data into the hands of the right people at the right time. And that's what introduced that and allowed us to consider that. That was something that was extremely important to us. My boss brought me here and he's like, I have a problem. And it was actually this one. And I was like, we need this proxy that prevents collisions. It prevents everything else. And it just says, this is the unified piece. And that's where we started this debate on how to find the right tool for the job that gave us the ability to do that, and kind of reduce the what I call the digital flotsam of just data everywhere all at once, and we just put it in one spot, get it into the right hands of the right people. I mean, that's fast and that's at speed and that's at scale. Everything else is like, okay, Jira ticket city, like, that's where I don't want to live. I can't even use Jira. So I'm terrible at it. So yeah, I just wanted, I was like, give the wrench to me and my team, so we can, because we have the understanding of how this should work, and the business allowed us to do that.
And now that is all in your, for better or worse, it's all in your camp, right? Like, you're able to do everything you need without reliance on any outside team for the most part.
Back to the sell and tell conversation. This is where I did the sell conversation, and apparently I sold them. So, yes, I have all that. Yeah.
Melissa, there was a good.
Real quick, I want to give an analogy here because it makes me think about, like, let's just say your company is one big puzzle. Your company data is one big puzzle, and you need to complete that one big puzzle of data for a multitude of reasons: personalization, being able to get the messaging correct, best customer experience. What happens, I think, is when you have these instances where the data is separate and it's not unified, it's like you have sections of puzzle and you don't know how to fit it into the big puzzle to complete it. And I think that's what happens, and where it gets really challenging. And when you break it down and you think of it that way, you're like, yeah, why wouldn't I put all those puzzle pieces in the bigger puzzle? And that's the data unification. And that is really what you're doing is you're taking all of those things that are mysterious to you and you don't know how they fit together. And now you have a place to fit them all together to have that and cohesiveness with the data and that unification. And now you get the big picture of here's what we were trying to complete. Here's what our ICP looks like across the entire business, across all the business lines, across all the geos. And I think about it that way from a data perspective. And I think it helps paint the picture of like what data nirvana can look like for a business.
I love that analogy. I would add to that and say that like without aligning and defining all the things that need to be done before you even start a project like this, it's like trying to put together a puzzle without the reference image of what it should look like at the beginning.
Bingo.
Right?
Yes.
Because if you don't know, if you don't know what the end state should look like, then how are you ever going to get there?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just made me think of a marketing campaign for Syncari.
Well, I'll take it.
Puzzle.
Yeah. There was a question, and it's related to something that you mentioned, Melissa, which is you mentioned, and I've spent some time in the CDP space, so I think we're both aware of the fact that B2C, business to consumer businesses have been doing this a little bit longer. Why do you think it's more mature in B2C and less mature in B2B when it comes to data unification?
They've been doing it longer. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's the nature of their business that in order to, think about Amazon and serving up recommendations for you. I mean, they have to know all the ins and outs, but the way that they've structured their business is transactional. And I think in a B2B environment, it's much less transactional, that it is more, like I was saying earlier, that it takes more time. And so you don't have all of those things fitting together to tell you a story until maybe a sale develops, and those sales cycles are longer. So, but I do think a lot of it is, the maturity comes from the experience on that one.
For sure. I also think that, something that over the last 5-10 years has kind of shifted in the way that business to business operates is that business to consumer has known for a long time, which is that it's all about the customer experience, right? Like every business will do, an amazing job. I mean, obviously you need a good product, but if you focus purely on customer experience like that, it all boils down to customer experience. And in B2C world, I think that was like a foundational truth that B2B businesses are now starting to realize that could be reflected as an example by a business that is operating a PLG, product-led growth motion, which really puts a lot of the focus and effort in communications and marketing into users, which similar to consumers, you're selling to users. Before I think businesses adopted that philosophy, they were still kind of operating like big enterprises where they didn't look at the people in a company, they just looked at the company as a whole, and that everyone within that company just was the same person. But it's not, right? We're all people and users, and you could have you could have a dozen people in a company looking at the same tool or software that all have their own different POVs and perspectives and goals and needs. So
I have a stat on this I want to share. So Towards Data Science is the name of the company who came up with this. And only 7% of B2B companies have automated personalization. Think about that. Think about what that looks like for B2C. I mean, I don't know what the number is for B2C, but 7%, that's so low, right? Imagine the power if you can give that a lift of 10%, and now you have 17% personalized. Think about the overall impact on the business. It would be pretty extraordinary. I can't imagine, and I hope to see it soon with unified data.
I mean, we all work in the tech space, and so it's hard to imagine that businesses are not operating with that kind of philosophy where, if the data exists, you got to do something with it, and it can all be to the benefit of a better customer experience, better user experience. But we're all in tech, and it seems obvious, but like you said, it is, for decades, people have been talking about digital transformation and unification of, the customer journey. But it's a challenge. It's hard. It's not easy. It's easier to get the data. It's a lot harder to figure out what to do with it.
Yes.
And I know we're going a little bit off tangent around, just broader, obviously multiple CRMs play a pretty big piece. Obviously, I think CRM is one of the core foundational pieces of software that any business has, and a lot of stuff can be done with it. But there are always these tendrils, and whether they're tendrils connected directly to CRM or tendrils that are all unified with a tool like Syncari, or within being done within a modern data stack in a data warehouse, the necessity to have that full picture across all the different connected systems is essential. And these multi-CRM environments and situations are always a great way to kind of solve some of those foundational challenges around unification that inherently will be a good building block, good foundation for doing a lot more than just getting two systems to live with one another or migrating from one to another.
Yeah. And I think the history of it's really interesting if you think about it, right? Like from where we've been and to where we're at now. And where we're at now is like the optimal place to be to get to that data nirvana, right? Like years and years ago, in the we'll call year 80s, we'll call around there. And they talked about customer master, which is ultimately a CDP, right? But it was done through data warehousing. It was done through big, elaborate, huge data structures that were very, very siloed and put into data centers because the technology didn't afford us cloud computing. And then over time, we start moving into cloud computing. And, not even within a 15-year period, we went from, being on green screen computers all the way to cloud computing that fast. And so from cloud computing, we go into, oh, well, now we've got all these disparate systems in the cloud, and how do we get them together? And then comes online cloud-based data warehousing, which is great, but it's difficult. And there's a lot of work that it takes to do it. You've got to do all of the data modeling. You have to do all of the coding, right? And I think that's a big piece of it is it's been really hard. And so the larger companies have had budgets and resources to do those things, but your mid-market and your rocket ship growth companies and your SMBs didn't have a way to do that. And now we've moved into the phase where the availability is online for everybody. If you have the runway set where you've done the data modeling and you have documented and organized yourself in a way, there are now tools like Syncari, right? Where you can go in and do these things that people were doing in only enterprise businesses before. Now we've taken all the best learnings for unified data from the enterprise, and we've now made it accessible to the SMB and mid-market, which is amazing. And guess what? It still also works for the enterprise, and it's even better for them because they're running into the issue of not just multiple CRMs, but multiple data warehouses. And how are they going to get all of those talking? And what's a quick way to do that? And you want to have unified data, you're going to need to have a place to put it and a fast way to get there. And I think that's the amazing thing right now is that we're at a time where the technology allows us to do that. And what a game changer. So it's very interesting how the alignment of, you think of like AI tools and the cloud and data unification all kind of coming together at once. It's pretty amazing how it's happening. And companies just need to jump on it and like really embrace this technology because it is a game changer. I've been around for a while. This is game changing.
Well, and because not everyone is doing it yet, it still is a differentiator, right? Mm-hmm. It's still a way to differentiate yourselves or differentiate through optimization, like being more efficient, optimizing processes, doing things faster, having more contextualization and personalization in your communications, pre-sales, post-sales. It feels like it's, square one, like it's foundational, but again, it's not easy. So it is definitely an area that companies can differentiate by doing this properly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I have to read this other stat to everybody here too, because this one's really fascinating as well. Wait till you hear this. Data quality issues cost the US economy an estimated $3.1 trillion per year. How about that? $3.1 trillion.
A big one. I'd love to see the makeup of that.
That's another one from towards
one.
data science. Yeah, I can make these stats available to everybody too. I found them and I was like, these are fabulous. If you're going in as anybody who is looking at unifying process and data, and you've got multiple CRM systems, data quality is at the forefront of that. And because even if you do the best job bringing all those systems together, if you didn't address data quality, you're kind of dead in the water. So data quality is at the forefront for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue in our last 10 minutes. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more and also try to talk a little bit tactically, because I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this are, maybe about to encounter a multi-CRM setup or this, challenge of unifying their systems. And obviously data quality can mean a lot of different things. It can be, normalizing the data, cleaning the data, even how the data is presented to the people who may or may not have access to it. But tactically, I'll start with you, Scott. When you folks started this, what were you defining, pen on paper or spreadsheets or charts or diagrams that, you would recommend people going through these exercises to ensure data quality? Because I know data quality is a byproduct of, being organized, understanding your data and what you need. So what would you recommend, Scott, as a good method or framework for documenting this stuff so that you can get team alignment and input and collaboration?
So one of our customers, Lucid, is also one of my favorite tools. So I exclusively use Lucid Chart to actually map out all of our CRM processes, everything we do in Marketo, everything we do in Clary, across our entire data stack. And what that does is gives visibility into our stakeholders, our executive sponsors, so they can see, okay, here's where the point of failure could be. The other thing also too, when you're building it, it's just not engineering schematics. The other variable that people forget is the human interaction. All right, that is a gray, almost, again, digital flotsam, right? It's like, hey, I'm a person entering in physical information in here. Me as a human, part of the human condition, I have a choice. And it's based off of those choices and what to enter. So, and there could be mistakes happen. And based off of that mistake, are you okay? And what is the innate risk down the line? Building it through schematics gives the user the ability to say, okay, if that is a point of failure, if we build something here, we enter in a piece of data here, what is the secondary and tertiary effects of that data entry? Where is that going to fail? Where do we need to cleanse that? Or is this an enablement issue? Back to change management, Melissa was speaking of earlier. Do we address it there early on? Or do we do both? And you want to try to do both, right? You want to try to enable people on the tool to do the right thing, and then reoccurring training. It's always part of I'm always training stuff. I'm always training people and building these things, but it's not just engineering schematics and say, cool, there it is, it's done. It's about how people are entering it and making sure they understand why that is so important, that they have that attention to detail.
So that diagramming in Lucid, is it something like, do you have your own style, or do you map to a traditional kind of entity relationship diagram? Is that one of the kind of frameworks that you would map to?
Yeah, so that's essentially it. Yeah, it's more entity. I mean, as far as Lucid, they provide more of the engineering schematics, and that's my background. So I just kind of rely on that kind of thing. However, I try to explain it the best I can to folks in marketing and sales, and say, this is where if you enter a 0 in, nothing happens, or it's just really bad on the other side, in a very basic way. But yeah, I just use just right out of the box Lucid stuff. It's easy to use, easy to interact with. And the most important thing is you can have this all up in your head. You got to get it in the visual spectrum,
Yep.
or else people just can't consume it. They don't understand it. And honestly, that's what Syncari does really well. You can code things in Apex to do very similar things. iPass tools do very similar things. SQL and Python to do very similar things, right? But if you look at a bunch of that, it's intimidating. If you go inside of something like Syncari, where it's a unified data platform, that schematic view says, okay, here's what changed, and here's where it's going to change there. And it's very, very easy to follow. So we start with Lucidchart, and then we bring that kind of process over and we build in Syncari and then deploy into production. So that's our change workflow.
That's cool. That's, it's like 2 steps.
Yeah.
Document in Lucid, build, mirror in, your Syncari, your tool of choice.
And then documentation goes out to people that are going to use that and stakeholders for reference, which is actually key. So that's part of that whole initial enablement process.
How about you, Melissa? In the last few minutes, what we've talked about entity relationship diagrams, and what about like data models? Like I think sometimes like you can somewhat reflect a data model through an ERD diagram, but is that also a good place to start?
It can be. I think it just, I'm about less is more. I'm about simple and know my audience when it comes to building out a data model. I will tell you 9 times out of 10, it ends up in a Google spreadsheet. And it does because people know how to read a Google spreadsheet. And if they haven't done data modeling before, it's like, I try to scale whatever it is back as far as possible to make it as simple as possible. I think going through modeling in general, you have to start with the data, the fields. What are the fields? What are the values? How were those mapped across to the other systems? I mean, it literally is going to that level and showing people, teaching people to fish, not just doing the fishing for them, going through that process. The other thing that comes out of doing that is they realize how much freaking work it is. And they have a new appreciation for you and the data team and the business systems teams, right? The people who are doing all the business applications. And I think that it's very important to show flows. And here's the thing with people. When you're managing people, people have a different way of intaking that information into their brain. So you have to show them, some people like that detail, some people hate it. So then you're going to need something like a Lucidchart and show them how a flow works. I think the more documentation that you have in different ways, where somebody could go in, and this is on a need to have basis, by the way. This isn't like go crazy with all your documentation, although you should, is that it's so important to show people different ways of how it's being done so they can understand it. The key thing is the more understanding that you get from the people who are going to be using it, the people who are a part of building it, the better off your organization is going to be. You're going to leapfrog because you're going to have brought all those people along with you in that learning process. And I know that's really high level, but it's really important, the psychology of it, right? If you're going to do something complex, you have to simplify it and you have to educate people along the way. And all of us are learning on everything we're doing on a daily basis, working in technology. There's never something that I would tell you that I know. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah.
Ain't that the truth?
I mean, that is a, that kind of alignment is a byproduct of, a project like merging multiple CRMs. Mm-hmm. But that's a byproduct that's going to reap rewards well beyond, the successful migration or merging or syncing of 2 CRMs, because essentially, we hear this all the time, which is RevOps leaders wish that, data teams, the people who do the work, understood how they look at data and understood the business objectives of the work that they're trying to do. And all the alignment that has to occur to effectively, define your entity relationship diagrams, define, your data model, decide which CRMs, are the authority, what fields are needed. All that work is aligning teams and educating them around, your work, RevOps operational leaders and what they do. And that will always be, until that entire until that entire team like leaves the company, that will forever, as long as you're there, be something that's reaping rewards, right? It's you've got more people within the organization who actually understand not just the how to do the work, but like, why is the work being done and what kind of outcomes is that work driving, is context that often is missed and not conveyed between business leaders and the doers and data teams and IT, which I think we'd all be in a better world if both sides of the fence were more aware of the complexities, but also the reasoning behind the work that's being done across teams.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Scott, for what I hope was a very valuable conversation for everyone who attended. And with that, we're going to conclude this, and I believe everyone will get the recording sent to them. So
Awesome.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. We'll
Bye,
see
everyone.
you soon.
Good
Bye-bye.
one.
Thanks.
Bye.